Hi, Dan. Welcome to the Asks One Person Business Interview Series. How are you doing this morning for you,
Uh,
7 a.m.?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this one. I'm always excited for these interviews, but because of how we know each other, so just for everyone's context, actually supports me at the Ask to figure out what is the best practice for newsletters, for growth, for potential monetization. We've been working together since the start of this year, I think coming up to a year now.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so he's been helping the Ask since 2023 in some guys. So it's cool for me to kind of flip the script a bit and ask Dan some questions about what he's up to and how he's thinking about his own one person business. So I don't want to take away from the intro. So do you want to just tell everybody what your business does and kind of what's going on in your world?
Sure. So I run Inbox Collective. I run a one-person consulting shop. I work with newsrooms, nonprofits, and individual contributors to figure out how do you build your best email strategy. That's growth, it's monetization, it's content strategy, it's optimization, and figuring out how you put together an email strategy to support whatever it is, whether that's a large newsroom or whether it's working with Ellen, someone like you who's building up your own business and emails at the core of it.
Yeah, and I think the way I heard about you or decided to contact you, you did this. Dan has these incredible blog posts, which it feels like a disservice to call it a blog, like a really meaty how to kind of series on your website. So everyone, I'll make sure I link it. And I think the one that I read that got me to contact you was like how to monetize your newsletter. And I always felt like I don't feel like I should be paywalling the Ask newsletter, even though I know there's probably money to be made and there's people out there who are telling me to. And then I read your description of different ways to monetize newsletters, and I felt like this sigh of relief that I'd kind of got my gut feeling right in the way that you'd explained it. So do you find that writing content like that, really detailed, in-depth content that you could arguably be charging for, has that helped you win clients and be where you are today?
Oh, yes. The number one growth tactic for me has been producing content. So when I write good stuff, it leads to new email signups, it leads to new client work. And so my content strategy has changed over the years. I started Inbox Collective. The founder story is kind of an accident. I was at
Yeah, tell us.
yeah, so I before Inbox Collective, before I was doing this, I was the director of newsletters at BuzzFeed, then the director of newsletters at the New Yorker. I had a good job. The New Yorker was a fun place to work. I had no intention of going anywhere or starting my own thing, but in 2019, January of 2019, I launched a Google Doc that was public and was called Not a Newsletter because it wasn't a newsletter. It was a literal Google Doc that was just public. And the idea behind it was I was having lots of conversations with other people who had similar jobs to me. And in that time, it was just focused on, other people who worked in media and publishing who did stuff with email. And people would come to me that have coffee with me. I'm new to this space. I want to learn. They'd ask, where do you go to get smarter about email? Like, what do you read? I said, oh, actually, I read a lot of stuff. Let me just put all these articles into one place that anyone can read. And so I created this Google Doc, partly because I didn't really want to get fired from the New Yorker. I thought if I created anything too formal, it would seem odd. Condé Nast would say, like, you're not allowed to start some like publication like that. You work for us. Like, your knowledge and expertise is supposed to stay in-house. So it was a Google Doc because who would feel threatened by a public Google Doc? Also, how big could a Google Doc get? What ended up happening was I attached an email sign up to that. And I said, hey, at the top and bottom of the Google Doc, I said, hey, if you want more of this, sign up for this email alert and I'll email you when the next one is out. And I remember telling my wife when I published the first one, if I get 10 people to sign up for the email alert, I'll do another one of these. And 400 people signed up in the
Wow.
first 3 days. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, that's good. Someone wants this. And it was all a combination of word of mouth. And I was active in a couple different Facebook groups and Slack groups where other email people hung out. And I had basically just linked it and said, hey, I'm going to publish this thing and I would love your feedback on it. Check it out. And a whole bunch of people wrote back and like, this is amazing. I love this. I took 7 links from it and shared it in my like internal Slack group with my colleagues. This is awesome. Keep doing it. All right, I'll keep doing it. So for a couple of years, my publishing strategy was all around the Google Doc. publish a couple thousand words every month, what I'm reading, tips, ideas. And then in 2022, I finally decided it was time to have an actual website where I could publish articles that had a little bit more longevity and go into a little bit more depth. And so this year I shifted away from the Google Doc and fully into the world of having an actual website, inboxcollective.com, where I publish stuff. But yeah, for me, it's when I publish a long article or guide, I know that's going to have a long tail. If it's good, it'll get shared. It'll get shared in other newsletters or other resources, groups where people are talking about email. It leads to new email signups. It often leads to new client work as well. The other real secret for me is anytime I want to talk about a new topic with clients or with future clients, I just write an article about it. So just recently, I published a super long guide to doing surveys as part of your newsletter strategy. I'm a huge believer in surveys. I think they can be hugely useful in shaping your strategy. Part of that is because I have a bunch of things that I want to share. And part of it is because I want more clients to come to me and say, we should really be talking about surveys. We feel like this is a missed opportunity. You know, you've mentioned it before, Dan, on these calls, but then we read the article that you wrote. We get it now. Let's talk about it. I've actually had it happen 3 times this week. The clients have come to me and said, we read the article. We get it. Can we go deeper on this on our next call? Yes, absolutely. So for me, it's a growth strategy, it's a content strategy, but it's also a way to help position myself with my existing or future clients.
I absolutely love that. And the term that comes to my mind is like content as a product. So it's a product that you're offering essentially when it's this extensive. And yeah, it's free, but it's still a taster. It's a bit like a sales funnel. You might sell a low ticket item. You're not selling it, you're giving it away for free. But guess what? Giving it away for free means new email subscribers, which means all these other things. So how long might you spend on one of these? Like, let's take the survey one as an example. How long did that take you?
That sort of thing. Oh, goodness. I wrote it over the course of a couple of weeks. The strategy I'll tell you now is a little different. Ellen, is, you know, I just had, well, my wife and I just had a baby a few months ago. So suddenly my free time is early in the morning or late at night to do some writing. So I don't get through these quite as fast as I did pre-baby, where something like that might have been, you know, I'm going to sit down and over the course of a week, I'll carve out an hour or two every day and I'll write an article. I wrote it in little chunks. A chunk was written on an airplane when I had some free time traveling for a client visit. But something like that, often 10 or 15 hours to write a really good article, it takes time.
And that's a really important point. Like, these things don't happen in a 2-hour window. Unfortunately, they're not a social media post, but the lifetime value is huge because people can find this kind of piece of work for a long time, not necessarily for 10 years because it might expire, but still it's you write it once, takes 10, 15 hours, but it will create value for the long term. So let's talk about what you do with clients. How do you support them? I'd actually selfishly love you to kind of use me as a case study here. Like, what do we do together, and how do you typically support your clients across the board?
Yeah, so I have a mix of different types of clients. I have large and small newsrooms. I have some nonprofits, and then I have a lot of individuals with cool businesses, Ellen, like yours. We'll talk about you just as a good example of this. For me, what I realized was individuals in particular, there are lots of different ways that I could support someone like you, and I may do some of these in the future. I could roll out on-demand courses or classes. I could roll out stuff like workshops for you, certainly something I've thought about. For individuals, though, I found the best thing that I can do is be an accountability partner and a coach. So I find that so many who are individuals, you know, building their own business or have small teams, they need an outside person to say, you know, where should I be going next? What should I invest in? I need someone to talk to about specific strategy items. I'm thinking about, to your point earlier, I'm thinking about rolling out some sort of new monetization strategy, but I'm not quite sure if it's right. Can you help me figure out where to invest, how to tweak it, what I might be missing, what I might want to stay away from? And so I serve as a sounding board, as a coach. I try to direct my clients towards, you know, opportunities that fit for them. I try to introduce them to the right tools or techniques that are going to help them improve their newsletter strategy. In general, all my clients have newsletters at the heart of their business, and newsletters are fun because, in particular, for the ask, newsletters are a growth tactic. They're a content strategy tactic. They're a monetization tactic. They're an audience research tactic. Like everything that you do connects back to email. It's at the heart of your business. So while a lot of people come to me thinking like, oh, what I really need help with newsletters is how do I grow my email list? What ends up happening is, well, we're going to also talk about how you use surveys. We're going to talk about monetization. We're going to talk about reader engagement. We're going to talk about long-term, like what are the pillars of your business? And so email is actually kind of a sneaky way to talk about how do you build a really successful business? Email just happens to be at the heart of it. So I do a lot of coaching. And then for larger organizations, I'll do bigger projects like audits. I'll do one-off projects around growth. Plus the business, because I have this website now, there's an advertising business and an affiliate business associated with the actual Inbox Collective website, and that continues to grow.
Nice. Amazing. I did actually miss some of it because my headphones just decided to go completely haywire, but we're recording, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you said. The bit that I looked a bit vacant for, that's why. So yeah, technology, hey. But yeah, I just want to say, like, I've loved working with you, and often what happens from my end is I'm having a big question, like, what do I do about this? And then we speak and you're like, well, it's quite simple already. You just do that. And I'm like, oh yeah, obviously.
But yours one I very much enjoy working with you too. Fellow coaches, one, get how this works and always come to the table with really good questions. You always, it's unsurprising to you or anyone who reads or follows your work, very thorough, which is, and especially with your prep for these meetings, which is super helpful for me. I love that. But yours is also a case, and I do this all the time. It's why I like to talk with people about my own newsletter and what I'm doing. It's helpful to have someone you can go, I feel like I'm going a little off the rails here. I need someone to tell me, am I on the right track? Does this make sense? And sometimes an outside person will go, no, that doesn't make sense at all. Why would you do that? Or you're overthinking this. Why don't we simplify it and just focus on X, Y, and Z? It's great to have an outside person, because then once you have that validation, once you have that, outside confirmation and encouragement, you can just go, okay, I feel good about that. Luckily, and I love this as a one-person operation, and I know you do too, there's not other people that you have to run the strategy by. Once you have the idea and you have confirmation that that's what you want to do, whether it's from an outside advisor, whether it's from feedback from readers, it's great. That's what I'm going to do. You just go do it. You don't have to go through 12 meetings, approval from the big bosses, wait for budgeting for 2024. It's just great. We're in, we're ready. Let's go on and actually do the work.
Yeah, like idea to execution, same day, sometimes next day.
Best.
Yeah. So let's talk about your business model from a unique contribution perspective. And by that, I mean, how has your own unique contribution, the expression of who you are, your strengths, your talents, your interests, been expressed through your business? Feel free to say it hasn't, but most of the time it has.
For me, what's really fun is I started in the traditional publishing world, if you can call BuzzFeed traditional publishing, I guess. I started at BuzzFeed working in email in 2012, kind of by accident. I had some conversations with the BuzzFeed team. They were growing. I thought what they were doing was super interesting. I had reached out. We had a lovely conversation. They weren't really sure what to do with me. And they said, come back to us with a pitch around, how you think you could be useful here. And BuzzFeed was all around telling stories that people would share. Email's the original source of sharing on the web, and they weren't really doing much with newsletters. So I pitched the idea of, why don't we try to build a newsletter business? Part of it too at the time was, one day Facebook, Twitter, whatever else may change the rules, which has actually happened. And, you might see less traffic from social media sites, in which case building your own newsletter business where we have a direct line to readers will be super important. That it turned out to be true. And so I was part of building an email strategy from the ground up at BuzzFeed, part of building an email strategy at the New Yorker. At both places, one was more focused on growth. One was more focused on growth and conversion to paid. The New Yorker involved ads. It involved events and a lot of different parts of the business. And when I first started, my unique contribution was, well, I've seen how publishers grow and scale. I've seen how publishers convert people to, some sort of revenue model. I can operate in one of those two ways. When people initially hired me, it was, we want either BuzzFeed Dan or New Yorker Dan. Like, our business is more like BuzzFeed, our business is more like the New Yorker. Show us how you do that. Over time, though, as I've worked with more nonprofits and then more individuals and solopreneurs, I've started to expand what it is that I know how to do. And now I get to bring my real unique contribution is I get to bring knowledge from all these different places to the table. So I get to talk with individuals about how a large publisher might operate in a certain way and thinking about revenue or surveys. I get to work with nonprofits and talk with them around, actually, if we operated a little bit more independently, like a solopreneur would, we might bring these tactics to the table. And so it allows me to see a much bigger picture of what's out there, different tactics or opportunities, and try to figure out, from this large menu of opportunities, which ones make sense for which clients. That kind of cross-pollination of ideas is really, really fun.
Yeah, and often when I start working with people who are bringing lots of experience to the table to start their business with, there's a feeling of, I'm really interested in this, and what's the intersection, or how do I choose? And often it's, well, what's the common denominator? It's you. You're the person that's done all these things. So there's something that you're bringing to the table across the board that you can kind of build into the business model or the pitch. I don't think this is true for everyone, where they have all sorts of disparate interests. You can't always put everything in one place. But in your case, there are true learnings to be gained from having those different spheres of knowledge. And I like the idea of like putting your BuzzFeed hat on, or your New Yorker hat, or your nonprofit hat. And it's, at the end of the day, a lot of the advice is similar, I'm sure. So that's really cool. And you're at 10,000 people on your mailing list, which is, we get meta, don't we? Email guy helps people with their email. So how do you grow your own email list, Dan?
What's funny is growth has actually never really been a huge focus for me. When I launched the consulting business, I had about 1,700 people on my email list. But I was getting emails a couple a month from folks saying, we're thinking about investing more in email in the next year, and we're looking to talk with somebody. And I kept getting these requests basically for consulting. And so I knew there was an opportunity out there. When I launched it, I told my list, I officially announced my newsletter, my business inbox collective in July of 2019, and said, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be leaving the New Yorker and going independent. Would love to talk with you and see if, I might be able to help you out. And I had 75 readers reach out to talk around consulting. It's like, oh, this is amazing. I have a whole list of folks who are interested. And those conversations were super instructive. For me, I never really focused on growth because I found that when I was writing for the right audience, people would come to me and opportunities were showing up on my doorstep, which was amazing. I've never really had to do cold outreach. The more that I write, that I share how I'm thinking, share new ideas, the more people tend to find and share my work for me. A big differentiator for me has been, there's a lot of writing around email and newsletters on the web. Not all of it is all that good. And so just trying to create the best possible content and resources and saying like, I'm going to do my best every single week, every single month to set the bar high and clear that bar in terms of the content strategy has been amazingly useful. People tend to find and share good stuff. And so as that happens, I have sign-up boxes on my website, different pop-ups, lots of things on my website that are optimized to try to convert readers. The biggest thing for me, though, besides creating content, has been word of mouth, because people are more than happy to share good stuff with their colleagues and friends. And I found that as I have built this business and continue to write and share what I know with my readers, they know that I'm pretty generous about sharing stuff. I don't put stuff behind a wall. I'm happy to share a lot of what I know. I mean, something like the survey article that I mentioned, that is basically a set of slides that I built initially for clients. And I said, what's the web version of this? I'm happy to share everything that I know, because at the end of the day, I know that, Ellen, when I work with someone like you, they're going to come back to me and say, I read the article about surveys, but I still want to figure out how to make that work for me. I've seen the high level tactics and the different opportunities. I still need to figure out how it works for a business like the ask. So can we drill down and talk about the specific questions, the specific tactics, how we're going to get people to take the survey? I still need to work and make it work for me. So I'm happy to share the big picture, because the consulting all comes from, that's great, I see the big picture now, but I still want to know, what does it look like if I run this sort of tactic for my newsletter, for my business? So people know that I'm pretty generous. They're happy to share with their networks and friends. Word of mouth and creating good content has been the biggest stuff for me. Frankly, I actually look at the landscape and don't think I've done that good a job of growing my newsletter list. Based on what I know about growth, I just haven't really prioritized it. Part of that is also because as a one-person operation, I get a lot of client leads that come into my mailbox on, a monthly basis. And I'm not really all that interested in growing the business beyond me at this point at hiring. That might change in the future. I've been really spoiled, frankly, in having the luck that I've had, and that people say, like, I like what you're talking about and writing, and can we work together? Like, people have shown up on my doorstep. I haven't had to do cold outreach. But it also means that I've always been a little nervous about the idea of, if I did grow a little bit more aggressively, what would happen to all these people if they started reaching out and saying, yeah, we'd really love to work with you. For right now, I have kind of a good balance between my list grows every single month and people show up on my doorstep, and I'm happy with kind of that balance.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people to hear this message. Like, growth is not always the right strategy, and you've got an incredible balance of, I do the work I enjoy, I work with a good amount of people, I've got enough leads, I make enough money, blah, 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 blah. And it's reminding me of that analogy of the fisherman who gets advice from a businessman to go and like do more fishing, or like build a fishing business. And then he's like, so that what? And it's like, so that you can have more free time and fish. And he's like, I get to do that. And the point here that I'm making is like, oftentimes we believe the next step has to involve more complexity, more growth, more headcount. But at the end of the day, it's so that you can be free enough to do the work you love and get paid enough, which you've already achieved. So yeah. I think that's an important message for people to remember here.
I've been very lucky. I make enough money. I have a good amount of free time in my day. I get to be here in the mornings and at the end of the day to hang out with my, son. I get to have this weekend. I'm doing a little bit of work on Sunday. We have a babysitter coming for a few hours, so I can do my prep for the week ahead. That's always important to me. But otherwise, like, I'm spending the weekend hanging out with my son and some friends, and that's going to be great. I love having that flexibility. And could I do that if I took on twice as many projects or was focused? Probably not.
Maybe not. We could talk about that all day, but I want to give people who've got to this point of the interview a bit of a treat. I'm guessing that they're the people who love email. They're really interested in doing it for themselves. Could you share a bit about your toolkit? Like, what platforms do you use? Are there any softwares you recommend? Let's give people some things to go look into for themselves.
So I've always kept things really simple. And my advice to folks is always launch with whatever the bare minimum is that you need. When I first launched the Google Doc, it was a literal Google Doc, and I had a newsletter that was on Tiny Letter. And then after I got a couple hundred people the first week, I was like, oh, I should probably buy the domain for this. I don't want someone else to buy notanewsletter.com. So I spent, $12 to buy that domain. I didn't spend a lot of money at the start. Even now, I keep things relatively simple. My tech stack it's WordPress to publish. It's Opt-in Monster and WP Forms to collect email signups on my website. I use MailChimp to send my newsletters. People ask, is MailChimp the best possible platform? I like it. It works for me. In general, I have a lot of clients who are on MailChimp. The majority of a lot of the newsrooms and publishers that I work with are on MailChimp. So I use it too, because it helps to be on the same platform as majority of my clients. If all of my clients shifted to another platform, I might look at another platform. It's good. It's more than good enough for what I do. So I use MailChimp to send emails. I use Google Forms to do surveys. I've also used MailChimp surveys as well. And I use Zapier for a lot of things to connect the dots with various automations. But I keep it really, really simple because it's what I need. Now, if things change in the future, if I start selling classes or courses, if I need to significantly ramp up the business for whatever reason, I might start using other tools. I also use stuff like Airtable for staying organized. I do have an editor that I work with on the website. And we use that to keep track of all the different stories. But again, simple tools, try not to overcomplicate things at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And like you say, when you start, you don't know what you need. So just keep it cheap, keep it light. That's really cool. Thank you. And wrapping up in a moment, I'd love to know how you're thinking about next year, trends in the space, do's and don'ts. Is there any advice you'd be giving listeners to think about their email strategy, especially the smaller one-person businesses that might be thinking about how the hell do I make this thing work next year?
For me, as I look to 2024, especially for someone who has a kind of a one-person business, there's a lot of competition now in this space. It feels like everyone and their mom has a newsletter these days. Now, will all of these newsletters last? Are they all going to be here in 2025 or 2030? The answer is probably not. There are a lot of folks who are just launching stuff on email just to launch it because it's, I'm not going to say a fad, but it feels like one of those prerequisites. Like, oh, I get this a lot from readers. Why did you launch your newsletter? Oh, I launched a newsletter because a friend told me I had to have one. That person, frankly, is probably not going to be around in a couple of years writing their email because, well, they're not thinking about email as a strategic tool. It was just kind of like a check the box. Well, I have an account on TikTok because somebody told me I needed to be on TikTok. And so I created something. For 2024 and beyond, the best advice I can give, one, continue to focus on content. Great content wins. Mediocre newsletters don't grow. If the stuff is good, it will find an audience. Two is just being persistent and really being persistent and consistent. If you are willing to hang around for a while and make good stuff for a while, you're going to have opportunities for success. I mean, Ellen, how long have you been doing the Ask now?
Over 3 years.
Yeah, I'm 2019. Next year will be year 5 of doing this work. It's just a matter of doing it and sticking with it. I know that a lot of the folks who are in this space, I certainly talk to a lot of these on a regular basis. They're like, I'm in newsletters, so I'm going to grow this thing fast. I'm going to sell it. I'm going to make a quick buck. I'm like, okay, that's great. Good for you. I'm in this for the long haul. So the more that you just think around, it's not about how my newsletter did today, but what am I trying to build over the course of the next year, a couple of years? How does it build, tie back to my business? That's really crucial. Slow growth for me is fine because that's kind of how I've built the business over time, and that's where the business is going. So content is really important. Persistence is really important. Being consistent with publishing is really important. I'd also say if there's a growth tactic you may want to think about partnerships. Think about working with other people who might have a similar audience to you, but right on a different topic. Those sorts of partnership opportunities, whether it's I'll promote your newsletter and my newsletter, whether it's something like this, hey, let me interview you. I'll promote it to my audience. You can promote it to your audience. Maybe we'll each get some benefit out of it. Yeah, there's great stuff there. Whether it's utilizing networks like Substack and Beehive have, after you sign up for a newsletter, hey, I'll recommend a friend's email. There's also tools like Upscribe from Sparkloop that can do this for a lot of different email platforms. Those intra-newsletter recommendations are really powerful. When a friend tells you, when a trusted person tells you, I like this thing, you should check it out, that's just about the strongest recommendation you can get. So really lean into those as well as you're thinking about growth in 2024.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, and I think everything you just said leans into the idea of if a friend's telling somebody else to go subscribe to your newsletter, that's because you've been around for a while. They trust that you're going to keep showing up. It wasn't a flash in the pan post. The content's good, goes without saying, I think, after this interview. And you are waiting out until that point in time where people are sharing. And consistent, persistent, and great content. I think there's an acronym there we could work with. Thank you so much. I'll be seeing you in our session soon. But yeah, any last words or anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up? And I will link your Inbox Collective. How would you like people to connect with you?
If people want to connect with me, inboxcollective.com is where all of my content is. You can sign up for the newsletter right there on the homepage. And the only other social platform that I spend time on is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and publish a lot of growth tips. I publish a lot of different resources there as well. I'm Dan Oshinsky on LinkedIn.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. Happy Friday, and we'll speak soon.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun.